What if I told you that Meghan Markle, once the glamorous duchess who walked the red carpets of Hollywood and the royal halls of Buckingham Palace, was suddenly reduced to something shockingly ordinary? A denied visa? Imagine it. The woman who believed she could step back into Britain on her own terms, who thought she could reclaim a spotlight she abandoned, finds herself standing outside the gates of power, her entry blocked by a single stamp on a piece of paper. No grand announcement. No royal decree. Just a cold, bureaucratic no. Doesn't that sound almost unbelievable? And yet, that's exactly what happened. The first 5 seconds are all it takes to make you lean forward. Because if Meghan Markle, arguably one of the most famous and controversial women on the planet, can be stopped at the door, then what does that say about the power struggle raging behind the scenes? What invisible hands were at play? Was this simply an embassy decision, or was it the culmination of years of tension between Meghan, the monarchy, and a British public that has grown tired of the Sussex circus? And more importantly, what does it mean for Harry, for Meghan's future ambitions, and for the legacy she's been trying so desperately to rewrite? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Let's rewind. The date is September 8th, 2025. Mark it in your mind. 2 years to the day since Queen Elizabeth II passed away, a date etched into the heart of Britain as a moment of mourning and remembrance. On this solemn anniversary, the royals gather to pay tribute to the woman who anchored the nation for over 70 years. Every gesture is loaded with symbolism. Every appearance carries weight. And yet, behind the palace walls, another drama is brewing, one that centers not on tradition, but on disruption. Meghan Markle wanted to insert herself back into the UK narrative through the WellChild Awards, and she wanted to do it without an invitation. Now, why the WellChild Awards? To the casual observer, it might seem like just another charity event, but to Harry, it's deeply personal. He's been the patron of WellChild for years, building connections with seriously ill children and their families. These awards are emotional, heartfelt, and raw, a chance for Harry to show a side of himself that isn't royal duty, but genuine compassion. It was at these awards in the past that Harry gave speeches filled with visible emotion, where Meghan once appeared alongside him, pregnant and glowing, playing the part of a devoted partner. The images are still etched into the public memory. For Meghan, attending again would mean more than just charity. It would mean stepping back into a legacy that connects Harry to his mother, Princess Diana, and into a spotlight that still resonates deeply with the public. But here's the twist. She wasn't invited. Think about that. A woman who once walked into the most secure, sacred spaces in Britain now had to request permission like anyone else. And when that permission was denied, she found herself faced with the humiliation of rejection. How do you think Meghan reacted? Do you imagine calm acceptance, or do you picture slammed doors, frantic calls, and a seething fury that her plans had been thwarted? Reports suggest it was the latter. The embassy's decision wasn't simply about paperwork. Officially, the reasoning was clear-cut. Meghan Markle had no formal role at the WellChild Awards. She wasn't part of the official royal itinerary. She wasn't a patron, and she certainly wasn't expected. In diplomatic terms, she was just another American requesting entry. But in reality, could anyone really believe this was just routine bureaucracy? Or did the refusal carry the fingerprints of influence far above the consular desk? After all, embassies don't like to offend. They don't like to attract attention. They like to quietly process applications. A flat-out denial for someone of Meghan's status isn't done lightly. And so the question lingers. Did someone inside the royal establishment whisper into the embassy's ear? Did Charles, still seeking to stabilize the monarchy, decide to quietly prevent Meghan's dramatic reappearance? Did William, fiercely protective of his role as heir, want to avoid another distraction overshadowing his family? Or did Princess, and known for her no-nonsense attitude, simply remark, "She has no place here"? The intrigue practically writes itself. Because one way or another, Meghan's denial wasn't just a closed door, it was a message. But why does this matter now? Because it shows us the delicate balancing act of power, image, and influence in 2025. Meghan and Harry stepped away from royal life in 2020, promising freedom, independence, and new horizons. But ever since, their story has been a roller coaster of media battles, failed ventures, fleeting successes, and endless controversies. From Netflix deals to Spotify collapses, from memoirs to lawsuits, every step they've taken has been scrutinized and spun. And yet, time and again, Meghan has hinted at wanting to heal or reconnect with Britain on her own terms. The WellChild Awards would have been her chance to craft a narrative of reconciliation, of compassion, of stepping into Diana's legacy. But instead, she found herself standing outside, denied the stage she craved. Pause for a moment and ask yourself, what does this say about Meghan's standing in the UK today? In America, she may still cultivate glamour and connections. But in Britain, the doors are closing. And they're not just closing politely, they're slamming shut with a definitive thud. That's what makes this moment so extraordinary. This isn't just about Meghan being blocked from one event. This is about the larger story of her diminishing influence, her shrinking ability to command attention on the global stage, and the silent but powerful message from the UK establishment: you no longer belong here. The build-up to this denial is almost cinematic. Picture Meghan, in Montecito, planning her grand UK return. Outfits prepared, speeches rehearsed, her team ready to spin every camera flash into a moment of triumph. She believed she could simply walk back into the narrative. But across the ocean, the embassy was already preparing a different script. No visa, no entry, no role. The story ended before it even began. And that's the irony. The Duchess, who once accused the royal family of controlling her narrative, now found herself silenced not by a crown, but by a stamp. Cold, impersonal, final. And here's the kicker. The denial came on September 8th. Not just any day. The second anniversary of the Queen's passing. A day loaded with emotion, reflection, and respect. For Meghan to appear uninvited on that date would have been seen as nothing short of intrusion. An intrusion the royal family could not allow. The symbolism is almost too perfect. While the nation remembered its longest reigning monarch, Meghan Markle was reminded of her place. Outside the gates, looking in. But what's truly shocking isn't just the embassy's refusal. It's what happened next. Meghan, stunned and furious, didn't simply accept the denial. She fought it. She pushed back. She sought to turn the story into one of victimhood and exclusion. And in doing so, she lit the fuse on a much larger scandal. One that would drag Harry into the storm, strain the fragile truce with the royals, and expose just how far Meghan was willing to go to reclaim her spotlight. Because this wasn't just about a visa. This was about power, about control, about a duchess desperate to prove she still mattered, and an establishment equally determined to remind her that she did not. And if Meghan thought she could outmaneuver them, she was about to face a harsh reality. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Why the WellChild Awards? Why would Meghan Markle, a woman with access to the world's most exclusive stages, Hollywood premieres, and international summits, obsess over a single charity event in London? That's the question we need to ask. Because on the surface, it doesn't make sense. Meghan could have chosen any cause, any platform, any moment to cement her influence. And yet, time and again, her gaze returned to WellChild, a quiet but powerful award ceremony that honors seriously ill children and their families. Let's strip this down. For Prince Harry, WellChild isn't just another event. It's part of his emotional DNA. He's been involved with the charity since 2007, long before Meghan entered the picture. For years, Harry has stood on those stages, choking back tears as he listened to stories of children battling unimaginable challenges with unimaginable courage. For Harry, it's not PR, it's personal. And for Meghan, that's exactly what made it irresistible. Because in those moments, Harry wasn't just a prince. He was Diana's son. And we all know Meghan has always been attuned to the power of Diana's legacy. Think back to 2019. Meghan, heavily pregnant with Archie, glowing in a chic outfit, holding Harry's hand as he gave one of his most vulnerable speeches at the WellChild Awards. Cameras captured every glance, every touch, every teardrop. It was one of those rare moments where Meghan seemed seamlessly woven into Harry's royal world. The symbolism was undeniable, a duchess stepping into Diana's shoes, supporting her husband's most heartfelt cause. The press coverage was glowing. The photographs went global. Meghan knew the potency of those images. She knew what WellChild could offer her: credibility, compassion, relatability. In short, it was PR gold. Now, fast forward to 2025. Meghan's Hollywood ventures have stalled. The Spotify deal collapsed in flames. The Netflix contract, though initially explosive, has fizzled under pressure. Her political ambitions have been quietly shelved. She needs a new story, a new stage. And what better place to find it than WellChild? After all, the British press may mock her, but images of Meghan at a children's charity? That's harder to criticize. It tugs at heartstrings. It invokes Diana. And it forces the public to ask, could Meghan still have a place in the UK's heart? But here's the irony. Meghan wasn't invited. And that fact, more than anything else, reveals the truth about her obsession. Because this wasn't about the children. This wasn't about the cause. This was about visibility. About reclaiming a stage that she believed was hers by right. Ask yourself, why would Meghan, who insists she's moved on from Britain, suddenly care so deeply about attending a London charity event? Was it compassion or calculation? Imagine the conversations in Montecito. Meghan pacing the room, insisting that WellChild was her moment. Her team warning her that showing up uninvited could backfire. Harry hesitating, caught between loyalty to the cause and dread of another public disaster. And Meghan, relentless, declaring that she had to be there, that she couldn't allow herself to be erased from the narrative. Because deep down, Meghan knew, if Harry appeared alone at WellChild, the spotlight would shine solely on him. She would be left in the shadows. And for Meghan, that was unthinkable. Now let's talk about symbolism. September 8th isn't just any date. It's the anniversary of Queen Elizabeth II's death. For the royal family, it's a sacred day of remembrance. For Meghan, however, it represented an opportunity. By inserting herself into the WellChild Awards on that date, she could create a narrative of unity, compassion, and moving forward. In Meghan's mind, her presence would be seen as healing, as reconciliation, as proof that she still had a role to play in Britain's story. But to the royal family, and to the embassy, that same appearance would look like intrusion, an attempt to hijack a moment of national mourning for personal gain. The clash of intentions was inevitable. And here's where the obsession becomes clear. Meghan didn't just want to attend. She wanted to control the narrative. She wanted the cameras to catch her arriving in a sleek dress, shaking hands, comforting children, standing beside Harry as if the past 5 years of chaos hadn't happened. She wanted the headlines to read, Meghan returns with compassion. She wanted the images to circulate on social media, reminding the world of her relevance. She wanted the story to be hers. But ask yourself this. Did Meghan ever stop to think about the children, the families, the purpose of the awards? Or was this all just a backdrop for her grand re-entry? That's the contradiction at the heart of Meghan's obsession. Publicly, she spoke about compassion and service. Privately, she strategized about optics and timing. And when the embassy said no, when the door was slammed shut, Meghan wasn't devastated for the children. She was enraged for herself. And what about Harry? That's where the emotional stakes rise. Because for Harry, WellChild is sacred. It's where he connects with the part of himself that feels most human, most like Diana's son. But now, Meghan was turning it into a battlefield. Imagine the pressure on him. His wife demanding inclusion, his family signaling exclusion, and his own heart torn in two. How long could he stand in the middle before something snapped? The obsession didn't stop with the event itself. Meghan had been weaving WellChild into her narrative for months. Subtle mentions in interviews, carefully timed charity donations, even whispers in Hollywood circles about her compassion projects. All of it pointed toward one goal, reclaiming WellChild as part of her brand. She saw it not just as Harry's legacy, but as a platform for her own. And the more resistance she faced, the more determined she became. That's the dangerous thing about obsession. It blinds you to reason. It makes you ignore warning signs. It pushes you further into confrontation. And confrontation is exactly where this story was heading. Because Meghan believed she could bend the narrative to her will. She believed she could force her way back into the UK spotlight. But she was about to learn that some stages can't be hijacked. Some doors, once closed, stay closed. And no amount of glamour, PR spin, or victimhood can change that. But if Meghan thought her obsession with WellChild was her ticket back into Britain's heart, she was about to face a devastating reality. One delivered not by tabloids, not by the royal family, but by the cold, unflinching power of the embassy. Because her obsession was about to collide head-on with the ultimate roadblock. And when it did, the fallout would be far worse than she ever imagined. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Picture this. Meghan Markle, convinced that her carefully laid plan to slip back into the UK spotlight through the WellChild Awards was unstoppable, suddenly hits an invisible wall. Not a wall of public opinion, not a wall of family disapproval, but a wall made of cold, diplomatic procedure. The embassy, the very institution that controls who gets in and who stays out. And for Meghan, the answer was clear. No visa, no entry, no exceptions. Now pause and let that sink in. This isn't just a scheduling mishap. It's not a misplaced invitation. It's the British Embassy, an official representation of state authority, drawing a hard line in the sand. To Meghan, a woman used to bending narratives and swaying audiences, it must have felt like a slap in the face. Because here's the brutal truth. You can spin stories in Hollywood. You can shape headlines with clever PR, but you can't outmaneuver a stamped denial at an embassy desk. That's bureaucracy in its purest form. Impersonal, unshakable, final. But was it really just bureaucracy? Or was there something more? Let's pull back the curtain for a moment. Officially, the embassy's reasoning was simple. Meghan Markle was not part of the official WellChild guest list. She wasn't invited. She wasn't a patron. And she wasn't traveling on behalf of the royal family or any recognized organization. In short, she was just another American applying for entry. And when it comes to visas, the rules don't bend for wannabe duchesses. The UK doesn't grant special treatment to someone who left their royal role behind years ago. End of story, at least on paper. But do you really believe that's where the story ends? Let me ask you directly. If you were an embassy officer, would you risk denying Meghan Markle's visa without at least a whisper from higher up? Think about it. This is a woman who still grabs global headlines. A decision like this was guaranteed to explode in the press. Embassies hate that. They prefer quiet paperwork, not international scandals. So the fact that they chose to deny her suggests one of two things. Either they had no choice, or they had backing from powers far greater than themselves. And this is where the royal intrigue deepens. Because while the embassy may have been the face of the refusal, the shadow of the monarchy looms behind it. Was it Charles who discreetly ensured that Meghan couldn't intrude on such a sacred day? Was it William, fiercely protective of his role and family, who signaled that the circus must be kept at bay? Or was it Princess, and known for her bluntness, who told the truth others wouldn't voice, that Meghan had no business being there? Now, imagine Meghan's reaction in real time. Her assistant delivers the news. The embassy has denied the application. Do you picture silence? Shock? Or an immediate explosion of rage? Knowing Meghan's history, it's not hard to imagine the fury. To her, this wasn't just a visa issue. It was rejection, a door slammed in her face, a clear message that Britain didn't want her back, not even for one night. And Meghan, who has built her entire public persona on defying rejection, could not let that stand. So what happens when unstoppable determination meets immovable bureaucracy? Chaos. Meghan began firing off calls. To lawyers, to PR handlers, maybe even to sympathetic politicians. She wanted answers. She wanted leverage. She wanted the embassy to reverse its decision. But here's the problem. Embassies don't reverse decisions under pressure. The harder she pushed, the deeper the denial rooted itself. It wasn't just a no, it was a no, and don't even try again. And here's the irony. Meghan has always cast herself as a victim of royal control, claiming she was silenced and sidelined by an institution too powerful to fight. But now, years after breaking free, she finds herself silenced once again, not by the crown, but by the stamp of an embassy official. Isn't that a contradiction worth pausing on? Isn't it almost poetic that the woman who once fought against palace protocol is now defeated by diplomatic protocol? Let's also consider timing. September 8th isn't just any date. It's the anniversary of the Queen's passing. A date that carries heavy symbolism, grief, and respect across the nation. For Meghan to appear on that date without an invitation would have been seen not as compassion, but as intrusion. The embassy knew this. The royals knew this. And so the denial wasn't just about visas. It was about protecting the dignity of that day. Meghan's presence would have shifted focus from remembrance to drama, and no one in Britain wanted that. Now, what about Harry? Because his role in this can't be ignored. He, after all, still holds ties to WellChild. He still has legitimate reason to appear. But here's the twist. Harry's name alone wasn't enough to pull Meghan through. The embassy drew a line between him and her. He was welcome. She was not. Can you imagine how that must have felt in their Montecito mansion? Harry packing for London, his visa secured, while Meghan stewed in California, blocked and humiliated? For a couple who once branded themselves as inseparable, the embassy's decision must have driven a sharp wedge between them. And here's where the scandal grows darker. Meghan wasn't just told no, she was told in writing. A letter, firm and clear, laid out the refusal. And as we'll later uncover, that letter didn't stay private. Its contents leaked. And in those words lay the seeds of a firestorm Meghan couldn't contain. But more on that later. Right now, picture the scene. Meghan Markle, the woman who once glided past palace guards and embassy doors with a wave of her hand, is now blocked by the very system she thought she could outmaneuver. No red carpet. No grand entrance. No sympathetic headlines. Just a flat rejection. And if you think Meghan accepted that quietly, think again. Because this denial didn't just bruise her pride. It lit a fuse. And that fuse would ignite a chain reaction that pulled Harry, the royals, and the media into a scandal bigger than anyone expected. Because Meghan wasn't about to take no for an answer. She was about to fight back. And that fight would reveal secrets no one was prepared to see exposed. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Imagine the scene in Montecito. The sun blazing down on the manicured lawns. The stillness of the California hills. But inside Meghan Markle's lavish home, there is no peace. The atmosphere is tense, sharp, electric with fury. The embassy's denial has landed like a bomb. And Meghan, known for her relentless drive and her need to control the narrative, is pacing the floor, seething. For years, she's managed to spin her way out of scandal after scandal. But this? A hard no from the UK embassy? This was humiliation on a global scale. Can you picture her reaction? Do you think she calmly shrugged it off? Or do you imagine slamming doors, frantic phone calls, and a torrent of accusations hurled at anyone within reach? Because here's the reality. Meghan Markle has never been the type to sit quietly when told she can't have what she wants. And now, trapped in her own Montecito bubble, the walls were closing in. Her team was summoned. Assistants rushed in with laptops, lawyers dialed in from sleek conference rooms, PR advisors patched in on video calls. Meghan demanded answers. How could they do this to me? Don't they know who I am? Fix this. Fix it now. The words echoed through the house, bouncing off the designer furniture and into the ears of a staff that knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about a visa. This was about Meghan's ego, her image, her brand. Harry, meanwhile, stood frozen in the middle of it all, torn, as always. On one hand, WellChild was his cause, his legacy, his safe place. On the other, Meghan's wrath was unrelenting, and she expected him to fight by her side. Imagine his face, conflicted, weary, caught between love and loyalty, between duty and drama. How many times has Harry found himself in this position? Backed into a corner, forced to choose between his wife's demands and the stark reality of the world beyond Montecito? But Meghan wasn't finished. No. Panic in Montecito doesn't look like quiet despair. It looks like calculated chaos. Meghan started calling in favors. Hollywood contacts. Political allies. Even whispers of reaching out to sympathetic journalists who could frame the embassy's refusal as something darker. Discrimination, bias, even racism. She knew the playbook. She had used it before. Victimhood, after all, was a card Meghan had always been willing to play. And in her mind, this wasn't just about being denied a visa. It was about being silenced. About being erased. Now pause for a moment. Think about the irony here. Meghan, who left the UK claiming she wanted freedom, who declared she never needed the institution, was now furious at being shut out of it. Isn't that a contradiction worth questioning? If she truly didn't care about Britain, why was she pacing her California mansion, obsessing over a single event in London? The truth is, Meghan needed the WellChild Awards. She needed that moment on camera, standing beside Harry, drawing on Diana's legacy, rebranding herself as a figure of compassion. Without it, her carefully constructed narrative collapsed. And so the panic deepened. Outfits that had been prepped for London appearances now hung uselessly in her wardrobe. Speeches Meghan had rehearsed in front of mirrors felt like cruel jokes. The vision she'd crafted of striding into the WellChild Awards, basking in flashing cameras, was disintegrating before her eyes. Each hour that passed, the reality sank in further. She wasn't going to London. She wasn't going to be photographed. She wasn't going to reclaim that spotlight. But Meghan isn't someone who admits defeat easily. No, panic, for her, doesn't lead to surrender. It leads to escalation. If the embassy wouldn't grant her access, she would find another way. She began drafting statements. Leaks were prepared for friendly outlets. Stories were seeded about her devotion to the children, about her unwavering support despite being cruelly excluded. She would flip the script. She would turn her rejection into a headline about victimhood. The narrative would be hers again. Harry, caught in the middle, grew increasingly uneasy. He knew the WellChild Awards weren't about optics. They were about children, families, and moments of raw humanity. But Meghan saw them differently. For her, they were a stage. And now that stage had been stolen. Harry's loyalty pulled him in two directions: protect Meghan from the humiliation, or protect the dignity of an event that mattered more to him than almost anything else. Can you imagine the weight of that choice? The silence in their home as Meghan demanded action, and Harry quietly wondered if it was time to let it go. But Meghan would not let it go. Not now. Not ever. Panic in Montecito was only the beginning. What started as shock and fury was already morphing into a new plan, a new offensive. Meghan wasn't going to accept the embassy's decision as the end. She was going to push harder, fight louder, and turn rejection into scandal. And here's the chilling part. The more she pushed, the more she risked. Because the embassy wasn't just holding firm, they were prepared. Prepared to defend their decision. Prepared to stand their ground. And prepared, if necessary, to reveal the truth behind their refusal. And that truth would send Meghan's world spiraling in ways she hadn't anticipated. Because panic in Montecito wasn't the end of the story. It was the spark, the ignition point, the moment the battle truly began. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Backchannel pressure. It's a phrase that sounds like something out of a political thriller. Quiet phone calls, unofficial requests, strings pulled behind the curtains. And when Meghan Markle realized that the embassy's no wasn't budging, this was the playbook she reached for. Because if there's one thing Meghan has learned over the years, it's this. If the front door is locked, you start knocking on the back ones. But here's the problem. Backchanneling only works if you still have influence. If the people you call still owe you favors. If your name still opens doors. And in Meghan's case, by 2025, that network of influence was thinner than she thought. Let's start with Hollywood. Meghan has always counted on her A-list connections to back her up. Think of Oprah. Think of the glittering names at her wedding. Think of the publicists and producers who once saw her as a golden ticket into royalty. In the early days, Meghan could pick up the phone and get sympathetic coverage with a single call. But now, after the Spotify collapse, the Netflix fatigue, and the endless waves of bad press, those doors weren't swinging open so easily. Behind the smiles, many in Hollywood were wary. Meghan had become high maintenance, controversial, risky. Still, she tried. Reports suggest that her team reached out to industry figures who had influence in political circles. If Hollywood couldn't fix it directly, perhaps a friend of a friend could whisper in the right ear. Meghan framed it as a matter of dignity, of fairness. She wanted them to see it not as a visa denial, but as an unjust snub against a woman of color, against a humanitarian, against a mother trying to do good. She knew the narrative. She knew the words to use. Victimhood sells. But the problem? Even sympathetic ears hesitated. It wasn't that they didn't believe her. It was that they didn't want to be dragged into yet another Meghan controversy. So when Hollywood didn't deliver, Meghan turned political. Whispers suggest she tried to leverage connections in Washington. After all, she'd long floated the idea of dabbling in politics. Friends in Democratic circles, particularly in California, had once praised her for her activism. Could those connections push the embassy to reconsider? Could an American politician pressure the UK into granting Meghan entry? It's possible the calls were made. But here's the reality. Embassies don't take kindly to political meddling, especially when the meddling comes across as interference in sovereign decisions. Instead of helping Meghan's case, the pressure may have hardened the embassy's resolve. Now imagine how this looked inside Montecito. Meghan on the phone, voice sharp, words fast, demanding action. Advisors nodding, scribbling notes, knowing deep down that their influence was fading. Harry in the corner, uncomfortable, watching his wife push harder and harder, as if sheer willpower could bulldoze bureaucracy. Can't you just see the tension in the room? The relentless drive of Meghan clashing with the weary silence of Harry? But Meghan didn't stop there. If Hollywood and politics couldn't help, she would turn to the one strategy that had always brought her results, framing herself as the victim. And this time, she aimed directly at the embassy itself. Rumors began circulating that Meghan was preparing to suggest the denial wasn't about paperwork at all, that it was about race, about bias, about being silenced yet again. She knew how explosive that accusation could be. She knew it would shift headlines from Meghan denied visa to is Meghan facing racism again. And she was ready to play that card. But here's the danger. The more Meghan leaned on victimhood, the less sympathy she found. By 2025, the public had heard the same song too many times. The Oprah interview, the endless Netflix narratives, the interviews about how the royals silenced her. Each time, Meghan positioned herself as the underdog fighting against oppression. And each time, critics argued she was twisting circumstances to fit her story. So when whispers of discrimination emerged around the embassy's decision, many rolled their eyes. They didn't see a victim. They saw a woman desperately trying to manipulate the narrative. And here's the kicker. The embassy itself wasn't intimidated. Quite the opposite. Behind closed doors, insiders suggest embassy officials were ready for Meghan's tactics. They anticipated the pressure. They expected the victim narrative. And they were prepared to stand firm. Their reasoning was simple. The WellChild Awards weren't Meghan's platform. She wasn't invited. She wasn't needed. And no amount of back-channel pressure would change that. Now, think about the emotional toll of this on Meghan. For years, her strategy had worked. She had bent powerful institutions to her will by reframing herself as the victim, the wronged party, the silenced duchess. But here she was, running into walls at every turn. Hollywood hesitated. Politicians balked. The embassy held the line. And the harder she pushed, the more isolated she became. Isn't that the definition of desperation? Harry, caught in the crossfire, must have felt the walls closing in. His wife pushing every lever she could find. His own cause, the WellChild Awards, caught in the middle. He must have wondered. At what point does this stop being about compassion for children and start being about Meghan's obsession with image? How many times has Harry been forced into this conflict between the sincerity of his own heart and the ambitions of his wife? And yet, Meghan wasn't finished. Because back-channel pressure wasn't just about influence. It was about sending a message. I will not be silenced. I will not be erased. And Meghan was determined to make that message heard. Even if it meant burning bridges she couldn't rebuild. But here's the twist. The more Meghan pushed, the closer she came to triggering a response she never wanted. Because the embassy wasn't just ignoring her. They were documenting everything. Every call. Every request, every attempt to pressure them. And eventually, those details would find their way out into the public. And when they did, Meghan's attempt to bend the system would backfire spectacularly. Because what came next wasn't just a denial, it was exposure. And exposure, for Meghan, is the one thing she could never control. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Picture the scene inside the royal corridors, quiet, deliberate, and far removed from the frenzy of Montecito. While Meghan Markle raged, while her team scrambled and her calls ricocheted across Hollywood and Washington, the royal family in Britain remained silent, utterly silent. And yet, that silence was louder than words. Because behind closed doors, whispers began to swirl. Had the royals quietly, discreetly, perhaps even invisibly, played a hand in Meghan's visa denial? Now, officially, the monarchy would never interfere with an embassy decision. At least, not on paper. The king doesn't phone consular officers. William doesn't dictate who gets stamped into Heathrow. Princess and doesn't draft policy memos. But what if influence doesn't need to be written? What if it lives in subtle nods, in quiet conversations over state dinners, in one-line suggestions delivered with a smile? That's the kind of influence the royal family wields. Unseen, untraceable, but undeniable. Let's pause for a moment. Think about the timing. September 8th, 2025, the second anniversary of Queen Elizabeth II's passing. A sacred day for the family. a day they wanted to frame around dignity, remembrance, and unity. Now imagine Meghan waltzing into the WellChild Awards uninvited, hijacking headlines on that very date. Can you honestly believe the royals would risk it? Would they really sit back and watch the solemn anniversary of their matriarch become another Meghan circus? Of course not. Insiders have long described King Charles as cautious, deliberate, and deeply protective of the monarchy's image. He knows how fragile the institution can be. He knows one wrong step can send public opinion spiraling. For him, ensuring Meghan didn't disrupt September 8th may have been less about pettiness and more about preservation. It wasn't just about blocking her. It was about safeguarding the crown's dignity. And then there's Prince William. If Charles is the steady hand, William is the sharp edge. He has been unflinching in his determination to modernize the monarchy, to protect his family, and to keep the focus on the future of the institution, not the drama of his younger brother's wife. Would William have whispered to key figures that Meghan must not be allowed to intrude? Many believe so. After all, William knows better than anyone how quickly Meghan can hijack a narrative. He lived through it during the Oprah interview. He lived through it during the Netflix docuseries. Why allow history to repeat itself on such a symbolic date? And what about Princess Anne, the woman known for her bluntness, for her refusal to sugarcoat the truth? Can't you just imagine her, in a private family discussion, cutting through the pleasantries and saying, "She doesn't belong here," and has never cared for optics or spin. She cares about duty, about protecting the monarchy, about keeping the circus out of the ring. But here's the fascinating part. The royals didn't need to issue commands. They didn't need to sign documents. All it would have taken was a suggestion, a knowing look, a carefully chosen phrase. It would be best if she weren't present this year. That's all. And the machinery of diplomacy would do the rest. The embassy, attuned to the desires of the monarchy, would act accordingly. Meghan would find herself blocked not by the crown directly, but by the faceless institution of state. And the royals could remain silent, innocent, untouchable. Now let's flip the perspective. Imagine Meghan in California, realizing the possibility that her denial wasn't random, that it wasn't just bureaucracy, that it was personal, that the family she had accused, attacked, and humiliated had now found a way to quietly strike back. Can you picture the fury in her eyes? The sense of betrayal, once again. The narrative writing itself in her mind. They're punishing me. They're silencing me. And yet, here's the contradiction. Meghan has always claimed she didn't need the royals. She walked away, remember? She declared independence. She built her brand on separation. And yet, the very fact that she obsessed over WellChild, that she fought for entry, that she raged at the embassy's refusal, proves the opposite. She still needs them. She still craves the association. Without the royal connection, Meghan is just another Hollywood celebrity. And that's the truth she can't accept. But let's not forget Harry. Because for him, this wasn't a game. This wasn't about image or control. This was about family, about honoring the memory of his grandmother, about supporting a cause he's poured his soul into for nearly 2 decades. And now, he was caught in the middle of a silent tug-of-war. On one side, Meghan, demanding that he fight, that he resist, that he expose the monarchy's cruelty. On the other side, his father, his brother, his aunt, standing firm, determined to keep Meghan out. How long could Harry balance between the two before something gave way? And here's the kicker. The royals' quiet hand may never be proven. There will never be a smoking gun, no leaked memo saying, "Block Meghan." But in the court of public opinion, the silence speaks volumes. The embassy's refusal aligned perfectly with the monarchy's interests. The timing was too precise. The symbolism too strong. Coincidence? Or calculated? You tell me. And yet, just as Meghan began to suspect the royals' involvement, something tangible surfaced. Something she couldn't dismiss as whispers or paranoia. A letter. A real, physical letter from the embassy. And inside that letter was a sentence so cutting, so final, that it ignited Meghan's fury like never before. Because Meghan's suspicions were about to be confirmed, not in whispers, but in writing. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It starts with an envelope. Plain, official, cold, delivered not with ceremony, but with the dry efficiency of bureaucracy. Meghan Markle receives the letter from the UK embassy, her hands gripping the crisp edges as though she already knows what's inside. She rips it open, scanning the text quickly at first, then more slowly, her face tightening with every line. And then she sees it, the sentence that slices through her ambitions like a knife. Your presence at the WellChild Awards has not been authorized, as you are neither an invited guest nor an official patron. Think about those words for a moment. Simple, blunt, bureaucratic. But for Meghan, they carried the weight of exile. She wasn't just being told she couldn't attend. She was being told she didn't belong. No role, no authority, no access. For someone who built her identity around being Duchess of Sussex, wife to Prince Harry, daughter-in-law to the King, it was devastating. A reminder that in the eyes of Britain, of its institutions, she was just another outsider. Now imagine Meghan's reaction. Did she cry? Did she scream? Did she throw the letter across the room in fury? Or did she do what Meghan always does? Turn humiliation into strategy? Because here's where things take a darker turn. That letter, intended as a private communication, didn't stay private for long. Within days, its contents began to leak. First whispers in small outlets, then screenshots shared on blogs. And soon, the words were everywhere, splashed across British tabloids, dissected on American talk shows, discussed endlessly on social media. Meghan's rejection was now a public spectacle. And here's the question we need to ask. How did it leak? Was it Meghan herself, desperate to spin the story in her favor? Was it a member of her team, eager to stir outrage and sympathy? Or was it someone inside the embassy, leaking it deliberately to send a message, not just to Meghan, but to the world? We may never know. But what we do know is this. Once the letter was out, the scandal took on a life of its own. For Meghan, the leak was both a curse and an opportunity. On one hand, it exposed her humiliation to the entire world. Headlines mocked her, Duchess denied. Late-night hosts in America turned it into a punchline. British commentators called it a triumph of common sense. The very narrative Meghan wanted to control slipped through her fingers like sand. But on the other hand, the leak gave her a weapon, a tangible piece of evidence she could use to fuel her favorite narrative, victimhood. She began framing the letter not as a bureaucratic denial, but as a symbol of exclusion, of silencing, of being punished for daring to speak out. They don't just deny me, they erase me, she told her allies. The leaked letter became her Exhibit A in a new PR war. Yet, here's the irony. The letter didn't just humiliate Meghan, it also implicated her. Because in its cold, official phrasing, it made one thing crystal clear. Meghan had applied to attend the WellChild Awards. Remember, she wasn't invited. She wasn't expected. She took the initiative to request entry. And that revelation shifted the spotlight. Suddenly, the story wasn't just Meghan denied. It was Meghan tried a gatecrash. And that distinction changed everything. Public opinion split. Her supporters rallied, calling the denial petty, cruel, even racist. But her critics pounced. If she really didn't care about the royals, they asked, why is she begging to attend their events? The letter proved what many had suspected all along. Meghan's obsession with reclaiming a role in Britain was alive and well. She hadn't moved on. She hadn't let go. She was still fighting for a stage she no longer had the right to stand on. And what about Harry? For him, the letter was devastating in another way. It dragged his name into the mud by association. After all, if Meghan applied, surely Harry knew. Did he support her attempt? Did he plead on her behalf? Or did he quietly wish she hadn't tried at all? For a man who wanted nothing more than to honor his mother's legacy through WellChild, this scandal was a nightmare. Instead of headlines about children's bravery, the world was talking about Meghan's rejection. His sacred space was tainted once again by controversy. But the most explosive part of the letter wasn't just the denial. It was the tone. Cold, dismissive, almost scolding, as though Meghan was being reminded of her place. No longer royal, no longer relevant, no longer welcome. That's what set her off. That's what turned fury into obsession. Because Meghan could accept being criticized. She could even accept being mocked. But being dismissed, being told she didn't matter, was intolerable. And so, she vowed to fight. The leak of the letter became her rallying cry. She would not be silenced. She would not be excluded. If Britain thought they could erase her with a bureaucratic stamp, she would prove them wrong. But here's the danger Meghan didn't see. Every move she made to fight back, every statement she crafted, Every whisper she fed to the press, it only dug the hole deeper. Because now the embassy wasn't just firm. They were defensive. They were prepared to release more if necessary, to show the world exactly what had happened behind closed doors. And Meghan, blinded by rage, was walking straight into their trap. Because the letter wasn't the end of the scandal. It was the beginning. And the next step in this drama would drag not just Meghan into the fire, but Harry too. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Picture Harry, alone in a quiet room of their Montecito mansion, staring down at the very same letter that had just set Meghan ablaze. The embassy's words burned into his mind, not because they surprised him. Harry had long known that Meghan's standing in the UK was fragile, but because they confirmed what he had dreaded all along. His worlds were colliding again. His wife on one side, his homeland on the other. And this time, there was no middle ground. This was Harry's breaking point. For Harry, the WellChild Awards weren't just another diary entry or PR opportunity. They were sacred. This was where he connected with children battling impossible odds, where he spoke from the heart, where his tears weren't scripted but real. This was his Diana space, the place where he felt her presence most. And now, that sacred cause was being hijacked, yet again, by Meghan's relentless need to control the narrative. Let's rewind for a moment. Imagine the conversation in Montecito the night the letter leaked. Meghan pacing, furious, ranting about bias, betrayal, racism. She waves the letter in Harry's face, demanding that he see the injustice. They're punishing me, Harry. They're shutting me out. But for Harry, the injustice wasn't about Meghan. It was about the children, about the cause, about how, once again, the spotlight was shifting from them to his wife. Can you feel the pressure in that room? The unspoken question hanging in the air, whose side are you on? Because Harry knew exactly what was happening. If he sided with Meghan, he would have to attack the embassy, accuse his family, and tarnish the event he cherished most. If he sided with WellChild, he would have to leave Meghan behind, go to London alone, and face the world without her at his side. Either choice would break him. And so, Harry stood at a crossroads, torn between duty and loyalty, between the past he clung to and the future Meghan demanded. And here's where it gets personal. Harry wasn't just struggling with the embassy's denial. He was haunted by memories. Flashbacks to his mother, Princess Diana, who once spoke about being excluded, about being silenced. He saw in Meghan echoes of Diana's pain. But he also saw the differences, because Diana's compassion was never about self-promotion. It was raw, genuine, pure. Meghan's fury, by contrast, felt like performance. And that realization gnawed at him. Could he really keep defending her? Could he keep equating Meghan with Diana when the differences had become so stark? Now imagine the phone calls Harry began to make. Quiet, discreet, late at night. To old friends in Britain. To trusted aides from his royal past. Perhaps even to palace staff he still confided in. Did he plead with them? Did he ask if the denial was truly final? Did he beg for a solution that would keep Meghan happy without destroying his ties to WellChild? One thing is clear. Harry was desperate for an answer that didn't exist. And what about the royal family's response? Silence. Cold, unyielding silence. No calls from Charles. No olive branch from William. No compromise offered. The message was clear. Harry was welcome. Meghan was not. That silence was deafening. For Harry, it wasn't just about Meghan anymore. It was about himself. About realizing that, despite everything, he was still tethered to the monarchy, still allowed entry, still considered family in some quiet way. And yet, the woman he loved had been shut out. Can you feel the weight of that contradiction? Harry, caught between two worlds, belonging to both yet fully accepted by neither. Isn't that the story of his life? The spare who never quite fit. The prince who walked away but never truly left. The husband who promised to protect his wife, yet now faced the impossible truth that he couldn't shield her from this humiliation. And so, the pressure mounted. Meghan wanted action. She wanted statements, lawsuits, declarations of war. Harry wanted peace. He wanted to attend WellChild with dignity, to honor the children, to remember his mother. But to Meghan, peace looked like betrayal. Silence looked like disloyalty. And Harry knew that no matter what he chose, someone would feel abandoned. Now, ask yourself this. How many times can a man be pulled apart before he breaks? How many times can Harry absorb Meghan's battles, the monarchy's coldness, the public's judgment, before the strain snapped something inside him. This wasn't just another fight. This was his breaking point. The embassy's denial wasn't a rejection of Meghan alone. It was a mirror held up to Harry's fractured identity. A reminder that he couldn't live in both worlds forever. And here's the tragedy. Instead of uniting him and Meghan, the letter drove a wedge deeper between them. Meghan saw it as proof of the royal family's cruelty. Harry saw it as proof of the impossible position he was in. And as their arguments escalated, Harry began to feel something he had long suppressed: regret. Regret that his wife's obsessions kept pulling him away from the causes that mattered most to him. Regret that his dream of a simpler, freer life had turned into endless battles. Regret that Diana's legacy, the very thing he cherished, was being overshadowed by Meghan's fury. But regret wasn't the end, because Harry, desperate and cornered, was about to make a choice. A choice that would shock Meghan, the royals, and the public alike. Because when Harry finally snapped, his actions would send ripples through both sides of the Atlantic. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It began like clockwork. The moment the embassy letter leaked and the headlines in Britain mocked Meghan's failed UK re-entry, her team pivoted into overdrive. The plan was simple. If Britain wouldn't welcome her, America would. And so, the US media spin machine roared to life. But here's the catch. Spinning this story was far trickier than Meghan expected. In the past, Meghan had found an eager audience across American outlets. Oprah's interview in 2021 turned her into a symbol of resilience. U.S. morning shows often framed her as the underdog taking on a centuries-old institution. But by 2025, the sheen had worn thin. The Spotify fallout, the Netflix fatigue, the endless victim narratives, they had left a sour taste, even in Hollywood-friendly circles. Meghan wasn't the fresh, silenced Duchess anymore. She was the woman who had been speaking nonstop for 5 years. And that meant her spin had to be sharper, louder, and more dramatic than ever before. So how did Meghan and her team craft the story? They leaned on the narrative they knew best: injustice. Meghan, they claimed, had been banned from Britain. They framed the embassy's refusal as a direct attack orchestrated by the monarchy. Outlets in the U.S. ran sympathetic headlines: Meghan Markle blocked from UK charity appearance. Talk shows debated whether this was racism, elitism, or just plain cruelty. The victim card was placed firmly on the table. But let's pause here and ask, did it work? Not entirely. Because while some U.S. audiences rallied behind Meghan, others rolled their eyes. They asked the obvious question: why does she even care? Didn't she say she never wanted to return? The contradiction was glaring. Meghan claimed independence from the monarchy, yet fought desperately for relevance within it. For many, that undermined her credibility. Still, the spin wasn't without its wins. On social media, her loyal base amplified the narrative. Hashtags trended. Influencers posted sympathetic takes. Emotional edits of Meghan wiping tears during past WellChild events resurfaced. The story resonated in certain circles, particularly those inclined to see her as a trailblazer wronged by an antiquated system. But beyond that bubble, cracks in the narrative grew wider. Now think about Harry during this media storm. While Meghan's PR team fed lines to sympathetic outlets, Harry stayed silent. Painfully silent. His absence from interviews and statements spoke volumes. To many, it looked like Meghan's battle was hers alone, with Harry reluctantly dragged behind. That silence only deepened speculation. Was Harry distancing himself from her fight? Or was he simply too broken to speak? And here's where irony cuts deep. Meghan's attempt to spin the story for American audiences actually magnified her humiliation in Britain. UK tabloids seized on the US headlines, mocking her attempts to play the victim overseas. California Duchess plays the race card again, they sneered. The spin, instead of softening her image, widened the gap between her and the British public. But the most dangerous fallout wasn't in Britain or America. It was in Hollywood. Meghan's allies watched closely. Studio executives, political donors, publicists, they measured the response. And what they saw wasn't a triumphant comeback narrative. It was a woman who looked increasingly desperate, increasingly isolated, and increasingly unable to let go of a country she claimed to have abandoned. For power players in Hollywood, who prize control and reputation above all, that was a red flag. Still, Meghan wasn't ready to stop. If anything, the backlash made her double down. She gave sympathetic leaks to lifestyle magazines. She hinted at a tell-all interview about the embassy ordeal. She painted herself as a mother fighting to stand beside her husband at a children's charity. The emotional framing was clear. Meghan wasn't just denied a visa. She was denied her right to support sick children. A calculated play designed to weaponize compassion. But here's the twist. The more Meghan tried to spin, the more inconsistencies began to surface. Journalists dug into the letter. They confirmed she hadn't been invited. They confirmed Harry was welcome, but she wasn't. The narrative of discrimination began to unravel. And the public started asking uncomfortable questions. Why did she apply in the first place? Why gatecrash a charity event on such a solemn day? The spin was slipping. And then came the backlash Meghan didn't expect. American outlets turning skeptical. A primetime host asked bluntly, if Meghan Markle wants to move on from the royals, why is she still begging for their approval? That question cut to the heart of the matter. It was the one Meghan couldn't answer. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the embassy wasn't budging. British officials, quietly but firmly, let it be known that their decision was final. No amount of U.S. media pressure, no hashtags, no sympathetic headlines would change it. And Meghan realized, perhaps for the first time, that the spin machine couldn't open doors that had been slammed shut. And that's when the panic escalated into something darker. Because if the media couldn't save her, Meghan had only one option left. To escalate the fight into something louder, riskier, and far more dangerous. Because the next phase of her battle wasn't about spin. It was about survival. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The headlines hit like a thunderclap. Meghan Markle blocked again. UK embassy denies visa for charity event. Social media exploded. Comment sections filled with speculation, memes, and a storm of opinions that ranged from outrage to derision. The public backlash, fueled by curiosity and schadenfreude, became immediate and relentless. But here's the irony. Meghan had anticipated some criticism, of course, yet nothing prepared her for the scale, intensity, and unpredictability of this reaction. In the UK, the backlash was swift and scathing. Public sentiment had shifted dramatically since her initial royal exit. Whereas once Meghan enjoyed the benefit of sympathy from the tabloids, now, many viewed her actions as opportunistic. Questions swirled. Why was she so desperate to attend an event she had never been formally invited to? Why did she leverage a children's charity for her own publicity? Social media polls and comment sections were merciless. She became the face of entitlement, accusations of gatecrashing and manipulation circulating widely. Meanwhile, in the United States, Meghan's loyalists tried to defend her, but the response was mixed. Talk shows debated the legitimacy of her claims, while news anchors in primetime slots questioned the narrative of discrimination. Even in Hollywood, the initial empathy started to wane. Critics asked pointed questions. If she truly wanted independence from the monarchy, why focus so intently on UK-based events? Was this about the children, or about her own desire for attention? And yet, the backlash wasn't only public. It crept into Meghan's inner circle. Close aides who had long been loyal began whispering concerns. Some warned that the escalating drama could harm Harry's reputation. Others fretted over the legal implications of Meghan speaking out about the embassy. Her advisors were caught in a delicate dance, protecting her image while trying to prevent the fallout from turning catastrophic. Harry, watching all this unfold, felt a knot of dread tighten in his chest. Every tweet, every article, every viral clip seemed to confirm that Meghan's attempt to spin the narrative was failing. But he also knew that the backlash wasn't entirely fair. He saw the intention behind Meghan's actions, her desire to support a cause she deemed noble. But he also saw the reckless execution. The optics were disastrous. To make matters worse, the British tabloids had a field day. They resurrected every previous controversy, drawing lines from past scandals to this new incident. Headlines screamed about Meghan's entitlement and obsession with royal relevance. Old photos, old quotes, and old allegations were recycled, creating a relentless wave of negativity. For Meghan, this was personal. Every article, every meme, every snide remark felt like a direct attack. The public scrutiny, which she once seemed to thrive on, had turned vicious. And then came the social media storm. Platforms that had once bolstered her image became battlegrounds. Twitter, Instagram, and even TikTok saw a surge of content mocking Meghan. Influencers dissected her expressions, body language, and statements. Memes portrayed her as desperate, angry, and out of touch. The backlash was no longer just media. It was cultural, viral, and unrelenting. In the midst of this, Harry tried to shield his family. He made private calls to WellChild organizers, attempting to clarify his involvement without inflaming the media frenzy. But his efforts were overshadowed by Meghan's more public, dramatic responses. Every attempt at nuance was drowned out by the roar of online outrage. And the consequences started to ripple further. Sponsors and allies, once eager to support Meghan's ventures, began hesitating. Brand partnerships were reevaluated. Invitations to speak or appear at events became less frequent. Hollywood insiders, ever wary of controversy, started viewing Meghan as a liability. The backlash was not just reputational. It had tangible, financial, and strategic ramifications. But the most devastating blow came in a quiet, almost invisible way. Harry noticed Meghan retreating into herself. The public criticism, combined with the embassy's denial, was taking a toll on her mental and emotional state. The fierce, confident persona she projected began to crack. Anxiety, frustration, and desperation seeped through, visible in moments when she thought no one was watching. Yet, Meghan was not one to surrender quietly. The backlash only fueled her resolve. She began plotting her next move, consulting her PR team and strategists, determined to turn adversity into advantage. She knew that the public backlash, if harnessed correctly, could be reframed as martyrdom. A narrative of resilience in the face of institutional obstruction. But the risk was enormous. One misstep, one poorly framed statement, and the fallout could spiral beyond control. Harry, sensing the storm on the horizon, braced himself. The public backlash had become more than just commentary. It was a full-blown cultural and media maelstrom, pulling everyone around Meghan into its vortex. And he understood that navigating this storm would require calculated, almost surgical precision, lest the fallout destroy not just Meghan's image, but the causes he held dear. And then came the realization that would change everything. The public backlash was only the beginning. The next wave, legal, financial, and deeply personal, was about to crash down on Meghan in a way no PR strategy could mitigate. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming.